Adolf Hitler, born in 1889 in Austria, rose from a failed art student and World War I soldier to the dictator who plunged the world into its deadliest conflict. By the early 1940s, he controlled most of Europe, enforcing Nazi racial policies that led to the Holocaust, 6 million Jews murdered, and more than 50 million people dead worldwide. But by April 1945, his thousand-year Reich was collapsing in weeks. The Allies had stormed Germany from both east and west. Soviet forces were closing on Berlin. American and British bombs had flattened major cities. Inside an air raid bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, Hitler's inner circle shrank to nervous officers and one loyal companion, Eva Braun. Reports show he was shaking, paranoid, and refusing to leave the capital. On April 29th, he married Braun. The next day, realizing defeat was certain, they ended their lives. She by cyanide, he by gunshot to the head. Their bodies were burned outside the bunker as Soviet troops advanced only a few hundred meters away. Within days, Germany surrendered. Hitler's death ended the Nazi regime, but left immeasurable scars, entire cities in ruins, millions displaced, and a global reckoning through the Nuremberg trials. His suicide became a symbol of absolute power turned inward, a dictator destroyed not by his enemies, but by the consequences of his own ideology. That 56-square-meter bunker still stands sealed under modern Berlin, a quiet reminder of how brutally a single human vision can collapse under its own madness. Benito Mussolini. Born in 1883 in northern Italy, the son of a blacksmith and a teacher. Charismatic and fiery, he became the architect of fascism, promising national pride, discipline in empire after World War I. By 1925, Il Duce had turned Italy into a one-party state, using propaganda, secret police, and a cult of personality to hold power. He invaded Ethiopia in 1935, joined Hitler during World War II, and sent Italian troops into brutal campaigns that drained the nation. By 1943, Italy was collapsing. Allied forces invaded from the south, his generals revolted, and even King Victorial Emmanuel III had him arrested. Germany rescued him months later, installing him as a puppet leader in northern Italy, but his empire was already gone. As the war neared its end in 1945, Mussolini tried to flee toward Switzerland disguised in a German convoy. At the village of Dongo, Italian partisans stopped him. On April 29th, they executed him and his mistress, Clara Petacci, by firing squad. Their bodies were carried to Milan, hung upside down in a public square, and shown to a furious crowd that hurled stones and curses at the man who had once ruled them. Mussolini's death marked the first dramatic fall of the Axis dictators. It stripped fascism of its illusion of glory and warned every autocrat what happens when propaganda meets reality. Italy buried him quietly later, but the image of the fallen Duce dangling beside his lover still stands as one of history's starkest visions of power undone. Joseph Stalin. Born in 1878 in Georgia, the son of a poor shoemaker, small, scarred, and fiercely ambitious, he climbed the Bolshevik ranks through ruthless discipline. After Lenin's death in 1924, Stalin eliminated rivals one by one: Trotsky, Bukharin, anyone who doubted him. By the late 1930s, he controlled the Soviet Union completely. His purges sent millions to labor camps or death, while his industrial drives turned peasants into factory laborers at unimaginable cost. When Nazi Germany invaded in 1941, Stalin's command and the sacrifice of over 20 million Soviets eventually crushed Hitler's army. After World War II, he ruled half of Europe through fear, creating the Eastern Bloc and igniting the Cold War. Yet, by the early 1950s, the man who inspired terror had become a prisoner of it. He trusted no one, saw conspiracies everywhere, and routinely purged even close aides.
On the night of March 1st, 1953, Stalin collapsed in his private dacha near Moscow after a massive stroke. Guards, terrified of acting without orders, left him on the floor for hours. He lay paralyzed and dying as his hand-picked officials whispered in panic just outside the room. He finally died 4 days later at age 74. His funeral drew millions, but many wept from habit, not grief. Within years, his successors exposed the horrors he had hidden. Purges, famines, and executions that killed more than 20 million people. Stalin's death ended an era of absolute control, yet his shadow still hangs over Russian history, a reminder that a single man's paranoia can shape a century, and even in death, his rule outlived his breath for years. Mao Zedong. Born in 1893 in a small village in Hunan, China. The son of a farmer, he rose from student protester to revolutionary commander, leading a movement that reshaped 1/5 of humanity. In 1949, he declared the founding of the People's Republic of China. His charisma and iron confidence turned him into a living symbol, the Great Helmsman. But his rule brought both triumph and tragedy. Mao's land reforms and industrial drives aimed to modernize China, yet the Great Leap Forward, 1958 to 1962, caused famine that killed around 30 million people. Later, the Cultural Revolution unleashed Red Guards against teachers, officials, and anyone branded anti-revolutionary, tearing society apart and destroying cultural heritage. Still, Mao remained untouchable. His portrait hung everywhere, his word treated as gospel. By the mid-1970s, decades of chain-smoking and heart problems had weakened him. He suffered several strokes, losing much of his speech, but refused to relinquish control. On September 9, 1976, at age 82, he died in Beijing after a final heart attack. Millions mourned publicly. Factories and schools fell silent for a week. Yet beneath the mourning was quiet uncertainty. China's spiritual father was gone, and the nation had to face what his revolution had cost. In the years following, leaders like Deng Xiaoping reversed many of his policies, introducing economic reforms that transformed China. Still, Mao's image dominates Tiananmen Square, his embalmed body visible to this day. His death silenced the man who shaped and scarred modern China, leaving a legacy equal parts revolutionary dream and cautionary warning about unchecked power.
Francisco Franco, born in 1892 in Galicia, Spain, the son of a naval family. Disciplined and ambitious, he rose quickly through the military, becoming Europe's youngest general by his early 30s. In 1936, after political chaos and social unrest, Franco led a nationalist uprising that plunged Spain into a brutal civil war. Over 3 bloody years, his forces, backed by Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, defeated the elected Republican government. More than 500,000 people died. When the guns fell silent in 1939, Franco ruled as Spain's absolute dictator. He banned opposition, censored the press, and filled prisons with dissidents. Yet he also kept Spain neutral in World War II, later aligning loosely with the West during the Cold War to secure survival. His regime mixed Catholic conservatism, military control, and fear. Critics vanished into exile or silence. For nearly 36 years, he held power through manipulation, loyalty networks, and repression. By the early 1970s, Franco's health was failing. He suffered from Parkinson's, heart problems, and an infection that left him bedridden for weeks. On November 20, 1975, at age 82, Francisco Franco died from heart failure in Madrid after a prolonged illness, still officially head of state. State television broadcast days of solemn mourning, but across Spain, many whispered, "Por fin," finally. After his death, King Juan Carlos I guided the country toward democracy, dissolving the one-party system Franco built.
His passing marked not just the end of one man, but the burial of Europe's last great fascist regime. His ghost lingers in Spain's politics, a reminder of how long fear can survive even after the dictator who created it is gone. Idi Amin. Born around 1925 in northwestern Uganda, a tall, athletic soldier who joined the British colonial army before his country's independence. Charismatic but brutal, he climbed ranks quickly, becoming a favorite of post-independence leader Milton Obote, until 1971 when Idi Amin seized power in a military coup while Obote was abroad. He promised reform and unity, but what followed was one of Africa's darkest reigns of terror. Over 8 years, Amin turned Uganda into a police state. He expelled about 60,000 Asians, mostly of Indian descent, wrecking the economy, and ordered mass killings of political opponents, ethnic groups, and soldiers he no longer trusted. Human rights organizations estimate that 300,000 people were murdered. His eccentricities became infamous, calling himself conqueror of the British Empire, claiming to speak with God, and delighting in public theaters while his secret police carried out torture behind the scenes. In 1978, his army invaded neighboring Tanzania, but crumbled under counterattack. By April 1979, Tanzanian and Ugandan rebel forces reached Kampala. Amin fled first to Libya, then found permanent asylum in Saudi Arabia. There he lived quietly under government protection, banned from political activity and largely forgotten by the world he once terrified. In August 2003, after decades of obesity and kidney failure, Idi Amin Dada died in a Jeddah hospital, aged about 78. Uganda refused to repatriate his body. He was buried in exile with no state honors. His death closed a grim chapter, but left behind a traumatized nation. Even today, Ugandans measure new leaders against his legacy, a cautionary tale of how charisma without conscience can turn a soldier into a monster and a country into a nightmare.
Augusto Pinochet. Born in 1915 in Valparaiso, Chile, a career soldier with a reputation for discipline, he rose steadily through the ranks and was appointed army commander in 1973 by President Salvador Allende, a democratic socialist. But on September 11, 1973, Pinochet led a violent military coup. Fighter jets bombed the presidential palace, Allende died inside, and Chile's democracy fell in a single day. Pinochet ruled by decree for 17 years. He banned political parties, censored the press, and filled stadiums and prisons with detainees. According to Chile's Truth Commission, more than 3,000 people were killed or disappeared, and tens of thousands were tortured. Yet his Chicago-trained economists imposed free market reforms that transformed Chile's economy. Prosperity for some, poverty and fear for others. He cultivated the image of a stern guardian saving the nation from communism. Facing growing protests, Pinochet held a national referendum in 1988, expecting to legitimize his rule. To his shock, he lost. A peaceful transition began, and by 1990, Chile returned to civilian government, though Pinochet stayed on as head of the army and later became senator for life to shield himself from prosecution. In his later years, global justice caught up. In 1998, he was traumatically arrested in London on a Spanish extradition warrant for human rights crimes, the first time a former head of state faced such international charges. He was eventually released for health reasons and returned home. On December 10, 2006, at age 91, Augusto Pinochet died of heart failure in Santiago while still under investigation. He never faced conviction, but his funeral split the nation. Some mourned a savior. Many more remembered a dictator. Pinochet's death ended a life lived between medals and mass graves, leaving Chile to wrestle with how to remember power that promised order but delivered fear. Muammar Gaddafi. Born in 1942 in a Bedouin tent near Sirte, Libya. The son of desert herders, he studied military science and became obsessed with Arab nationalism and anti-colonial movements. In 1969, at just 27, he led a bloodless coup that overthrew King Idris I, promising freedom, equality, and an end to foreign influence. For the next 42 years, Gaddafi ruled Libya with theatrical flair and iron control. He abolished the monarchy, nationalized oil, and published his quirky political philosophy, the Green Book, while shaping a cult of personality that mixed revolutionary rhetoric with unpredictable cruelty. Dissidents vanished, fortunes flowed from oil wealth, and Gaddafi styled himself as brother leader and king of kings of Africa. His regime was accused of assassinations abroad and linked to terror acts like the 1998 Lockerbie bombing. By the 2000s, Gaddafi sought global rehabilitation, giving up weapons programs and even hosting Western leaders in his tent. Yet inside Libya, anger simmered. When the Arab Spring reached Tripoli in 2011, protests swelled into rebellion. NATO intervened militarily to protect civilians, turning the uprising into a full civil war. As rebel forces closed in that October, Gaddafi fled his hometown of Sirte in a convoy attacked by aircraft. Captured hiding in a drainage pipe, he was beaten and shot by rebels on October 20, 2011, ending one of modern Africa's longest dictatorships. His death was filmed and spread worldwide, an unfiltered image of an era collapsing. Libya erupted into years of chaos, rival governments, and shifting militias. Gaddafi's downfall became a lasting warning. Absolute power maintained through fear can vanish in a single afternoon, leaving only wreckage and regret where a nation had once been promised glory.
Saddam Hussein, born in 1937 near Tikrit, Iraq, into hardship and violence. Orphaned young, he grew up valuing power as survival. Joining the Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, he helped plot coups before seizing control outright in 1979. As president, he turned Iraq into one of the Middle East's most feared police states, portraits everywhere, dissent nowhere. Saddam used oil wealth to modernize the country, but ruled through terror. His secret police murdered rivals, and his campaigns against Kurdish civilians, including the 1988 chemical attack on Halabja, left thousands dead. In 1980, he invaded Iran, starting an 8-year war that killed over 1 million people without clear victory. 2 years after invading Kuwait in 1990, U.S.-led forces drove his army out, but sanctions and internal repression followed. Determined to project strength, Saddam defied the United Nations through the 1990s, fueling accusations of hidden weapons programs. In 2003, the United States and allies invaded Iraq, toppling his regime within weeks. Found that December in an underground hideout near his hometown, the once almighty dictator looked disoriented and frail, a man reduced to a fugitive. Tried by an Iraqi court for crimes against humanity tied to the 1982 Dujail massacre, Saddam was convicted and sentenced to death. On December 30, 2006, he was executed by hanging. Television clips of the event flashed worldwide within hours. His death ended nearly 3 decades of fear, yet Iraq soon plunged into sectarian violence and chaos. To some, Saddam's execution was overdue justice. To others, it unleashed a deeper instability his brutal grip had masked. His rise and fall remain a study in how absolute control built on violence all but guarantees a violent end. Pol Pot. Born Salath Sar in 1925 in rural Cambodia, a quiet student who later studied in Paris and absorbed Marxist ideology. Returning home in the 1950s, he helped form the Khmer Rouge, a communist movement that portrayed itself as liberators. In 1975, after years of civil war, his guerrilla army captured Phnom Penh and declared Year Zero. The goal? Erase Cambodia's past and create a pure, classless agrarian state. What followed was one of the 20th century's darkest nightmares. Pol Pot emptied cities, banned religion, and forced millions into countryside labor camps. Families were torn apart, speaking foreign languages or wearing glasses could mark someone for death. Between 1.7 and 2 million people, nearly a quarter of Cambodia's population, died from execution, starvation, and disease between 1975 and 1979. That year, Vietnam invaded after repeated border attacks, toppling Pol Pot's regime. He fled into the jungle with loyal remnants, continuing guerrilla warfare for years. As the world saw the mass graves of the killing fields, he became an international symbol of ideological horror.
Isolated and aging, Pol Pot still insisted he had done nothing wrong. In 1997, his own followers placed him under house arrest deep in the jungle. The next year, on April 15, 1998, he died suddenly, officially of a heart attack, just as international forces were preparing to extradite him for trial. Some believe he took poison to avoid capture. Pol Pot died unpunished, cremated hastily on a pyre of old tires and scrap wood. Yet the terror he unleashed still haunts Cambodia, an enduring reminder that utopia is built on purity and paranoia, and not in paradise, but in ash.
Kim Il-sung, born in 1912 near Pyongyang, then under Japanese occupation. As a youth, he fought with communist guerrillas in Manchuria, and by the end of World War II, he was promoted by the Soviet Union as Korea's new leader. In 1948, he founded the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, sealing the peninsula's division. Charismatic and ruthless, Kim built a totalitarian system worshiping his image as the great leader. In 1950, he launched an invasion of South Korea, igniting the Korean War, which killed over 3 million people and left the country in ruins. After the 1953 armistice, he rebuilt the North through heavy industry, mass mobilization, and absolute censorship. Over 4 decades, he created a near-religious cult of personality, giant statues, loyal songs, and slogans, while purging rivals and isolating the nation from the world. To his people, he was portrayed as a godlike savior. Outside, he was a Cold War enigma. By the early 1990s, the Soviet collapse devastated North Korea's economy. Even so, Kim tightened control, grooming his son Kim Jong-il to continue the dynasty. On July 8, 1994, at 82, Kim Il-sung suffered a sudden heart attack at his country residence. State media announced national mourning that lasted 10 days. Millions marched, wept, and bowed before his statues. He was embalmed and placed in the Kumsasan Palace of the Sun, now his mausoleum. Kim's death did not end his rule. He was declared North Korea's eternal president. His dynasty lives on through successive generations, and the system he built, personal worship fused with militarized isolation, remains intact. Kim Il-sung left a nation frozen in the image of his founder, a family dictatorship surviving through fear, myth, and relentless control. Fidel Castro. Born in 1926 in eastern Cuba, the son of a wealthy farmer who sent him to Jesuit schools where he developed fierce pride and defiance. As a young lawyer angered by U.S. influence and local corruption, he led a failed attack on the Moncada barracks in 1953, was jailed, then exiled to Mexico, where he met Che Guevara, trained guerrillas, and in 1956 sailed back to Cuba on the tiny yacht Granma to ignite revolution. After 3 years of jungle warfare, Castro's rebel army toppled dictator Fulgencio Batista on January 1, 1959. At 32, Castro became prime minister, promising social justice and independence. He nationalized industries, opened schools and clinics, and silenced opposition. Relations with Washington collapsed, pushing him toward Moscow. His alliance with the Soviet Union led to the Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961, which he survived, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, 1962, that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. For decades, Castro defied U.S. embargoes and assassination plots, over 600 attempts according to Cuban records. He sent troops abroad, championed socialism, and ruled with unyielding control while political prisoners filled island jails. After years of declining health, he ceded power to his brother Raúl in 2006, but remained Cuba's symbolic commander-in-chief. On November 25, 2016, at 90, Fidel Castro died in Havana from natural causes. His ashes were carried across the island in a days-long procession tracing his revolution route. Millions lined the roads to salute him. Others quietly celebrated an end to an era. Castro's death closed nearly half a century of one-man rule. To supporters, he was the David who defied empires. To critics, a dictator who caged his own people. His life and death still divide Cuba, a legacy of revolution written in both pride and pain.
Slobodan Milosevic. Born in 1941 in Požarevac, Serbia, into a family marked by political passion and personal tragedy, both his parents later took their own lives. Trained as a lawyer and polished as a technocrat, he climbed the Communist Party ranks quietly until the 1980s, when economic crisis and nationalism simmered across Yugoslavia. By 1987, a fiery speech defending Serbs in Kosovo catapulted him to fame. He reinvented himself as a nationalist strongman who promised to defend Serbian pride at any cost. In 1989, Milosevic became president of Serbia, using patriotism and propaganda to centralize power. As Yugoslavia disintegrated, he armed and supported Serb forces in Croatia, Bosnia, and later Kosovo. Every battlefield carried echoes of his command: siege warfare, ethnic cleansing, mass displacement. The Bosnian War alone left over 100,000 dead and 2 million displaced. Yet at home, his control of state TV cast him as a rescuer besieged by traitors and foreigners. By 1999, NATO bombed Serbia to stop atrocities in Kosovo, and public patience collapsed. In October 2000, after disputed elections, massive street protests forced Milosevic to resign, the same police and military he'd used to rule, refusing to defend him. In 2001, the new government extradited him to The Hague to face war crimes and genocide charges before the UN tribunal. The trial dragged on for 5 years, filled with his defiant speeches and denials. Then, on March 11, 2006, Milosevic was found dead in his cell at 64 from a heart attack before verdict could be reached. His sudden death denied survivors a formal judgment, but sealed his legacy nonetheless. The man who promised unity left behind shattered nations, mass graves, and a reminder that nationalist obsession often ends where it begins, in destruction and denial. Nicolae Ceausescu. Born in 1918 in a poor Romanian village and apprenticed as a shoemaker before joining the communist movement, intelligent yet paranoid, he spent years in prison under the monarchy and emerged after World War II as a loyal party man. When he became general secretary in 1965, Romania briefly admired him as he defied Moscow's control, opened cautious ties with the West, and built a reputation as an independent communist reformer. That image collapsed as his ego expanded. By the 1970s, Ceausescu and his wife, Elena, styled themselves as a royal pair, plastering portraits across the country and forcing citizens into grand parades of praise. He borrowed billions from Western banks to industrialize, but mismanagement and corruption turned prosperity into poverty. To repay debts, he ordered massive exports of food and fuel, leaving Romanians hungry and freezing. The secret police, the Securite, created one of Europe's densest surveillance networks, jailing anyone who whispered dissent. By the late 1980s, Ceausescu bragged that Romania had no crisis, even as shelves were bare. Inspired by revolutions sweeping Eastern Europe, angry crowds filled the streets in December 1989. When he tried to deliver one of his balcony speeches, chants of "Down with Ceausescu" erupted. His spell was broken. He fled Bucharest in a helicopter, but was captured by the army 2 days later. On December 25, 1989, after a brief military trial, Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu were both executed by firing squad outside a garrison building. The entire proceeding lasted less than an hour. Their deaths ended 24 years of dictatorship and marked the bloodiest of Eastern Europe's communist collapses. Though he was buried quietly under guard, Romanians still recall that winter day, when a nation silenced the man who had tried to control even its heartbeat.
Francisco Macias Nguema. Born around 1924 in Mongomo, a remote part of what was then Spanish Equatorial Guinea. With limited schooling but sharp ambition, he joined colonial administration and soon became one of the few Africans to hold senior local posts.
When independence came in 1968, he was elected the new nation's first president, promising freedom and unity. Within months, he dismantled democracy, declared himself president for life, and plunged his country into terror. Macias built a regime based on fear and superstition. He banned private education, outlawed religion, and ordered the death of intellectuals and rivals. Thousands were executed or fled into exile out of a population of just 300,000. Roughly a third either escaped or were killed. He shut down hospitals and schools, diverted national funds to personal rituals, and proclaimed magical powers, calling himself unique miracle. Even radios were banned, except for his speeches and military music. By 1979, paranoia consumed him. He executed family members, ministers, and anyone he suspected of disloyalty. The economy collapsed, fields went untended, cities emptied. That August, his nephew and army commander, Theodoro Obiang Nguema Masbazgo, led a coup to stop the bloodshed. Macias was captured after a brief chase through the jungle. Tried openly for genocide and economic ruin, he listened impassively as witnesses recounted atrocities. On September 29, 1979, Francisco Macias Nguema was executed by firing squad at Black Beach Prison in Malabo. His downfall switched one dictator for another. Obiang still rules decades later, but ended a reign so violent that even other autocrats called him mad. Macias left behind a shattered country and a warning carved into its history. When absolute power rests on fear and superstition instead of reason, a nation can lose nearly everything, including its soul.